This is Chris Haley. This episode makes reference to suicide. Please be advised.
Presenting Dr. IQ.
Let's imagine it's the 1930s and you're testing this wild idea. Can you create an incubator for creativity? Where would you decide to try it? Maybe in a region hit hard by the Great Depression. Would Lincoln, Nebraska be your first choice? Probably not. But that's exactly where it happened. Now listen to prize-winning author Maury Sandoz describe her time in Lincoln during those years. She had come to Lincoln from the dirt-poor farm where she grew up in western Nebraska.
Every time I'd get $50 in the bank, I'd quit any job I had and write a while.
I've just been reading about you all week, and the happiest time seems to me the time you were in Lincoln, when you didn't have any money, and you called it your Greenwich Village time.
It was a nice time because I had just enough to pay that $8 a month room. And there were an awful lot of other creative young people around in music, and several poets and short story writers. And we did all the usual things. We carried the American Mercury around under our arm, and we sneaked Ulysses and read Ulysses and things of that kind.
And you finally gave up your job, didn't you, and decided you just had to run?
Lincoln, just a few years before the Depression, was a place where movie theaters could not show movies on Sundays for religious reasons. And as Sandoz recalled, carrying a copy of James Joyce's Ulysses, a book banned as obscene, was enough to raise eyebrows. Yet, by 1935, Lincoln was home to a budding creative community. That's when the Federal Writers Project came to town, determined to turn over every rock to find the real Nebraska. The Nebraska Writers Project would bring together an unexpected mix: a hobo novelist, a poet, a nurse-turned-interviewer, and a handful of salesmen and school teachers. With a little guidance from a local professor, this unlikely group would come together to create something surprising and truly transformative. And Maury Sandoz, the no-nonsense published author, would become its truth-telling godmother, a mentor to the project's young writers.
This is part of your philosophy of writing, isn't it? That you should write the truth, whether it shocks or...
Oh, definitely, yes. Yes, you have no right to falsify life, ever. No,
Yes.
never. That's the cardinal sin of the writer. And that's the thing that you cannot face yourself afterward, I don't think.
This is The People's Recorder, and I'm your host, Chris Haley. This podcast explores the work of the Federal Writers Project, a 1930s government agency that set out to document the lives of everyday Americans. The project ended up raising just as many questions as it answered in its quest to hold up a mirror to America. Questions that we still ask ourselves today. During the Great Depression, no place was more hard hit than Nebraska. Unemployment was high. 17% of Nebraskans relied on emergency relief, and that figure was low. It did not include everyone who needed help. Many Nebraskans refused to sign up for government aid because they saw it as charity. It ran against everything they cherished about the pioneer spirit. Across the state, crops failed and farms went under, and the city of Lincoln became a magnet for children of farm families who dreamed of escaping poverty. One big draw was the University of Nebraska, which was starting to get a lot of attention because of a literature professor named Lowry Wimberly. He had an eye for spotting talent, and he nurtured his students' budding careers, providing a space where they could support each other's creative work. Here's Nebraska historian Stephen Cloyd.
Wimberly was really interested in anybody that he thought could do any writing.
The professor gave support in the way that good mentors do, by sharing a passion for their subject. Wimberly edited a magazine called Prairie Schooner. The name referred to the big canvas-top wagons of the Old West. Wimberly's magazine became famous as a publisher of the best fiction, nonfiction, and poetry from and about America's heartland.
These are people who are trying very hard to do justice to the world that they actually knew, the language, the places, and the people that were actually part of their experience. There were some lovely descriptions of driving across Nebraska and seeing the prairie and the wild roses and everything and just floating through that along the Oregon Trail.
The early tales of overland journeys to the Pacific often speak of the monotony of the prairies. The violets among the prairie grass stood up sturdily. The wild roses grew close to the ground. There were wild grapes and wild plums here and there along the streams. When autumn came, the long days of golden sunshine and sapphire skies made up only a little for the mere brownness beneath them. Sunshine and wide skies and glowing sunsets, these were the coins the prairies offered in exchange for all they lacked. Published in Prairie Schooner, 1927.
The magazine captured the region's flavor so well that national publishers took notice. Prairie Schooner appeared on a list of the best American literary magazines. Nobody in the New York publishing world expected this from the Great Plains.
It's hard to think about Lincoln this way, but Maury Sandoz said that what Wimberly had created in Lincoln in those years was kind of a bohemian atmosphere in which there was somebody writing in every cafe in town. There was this excitement about writing that she never remembered before and certainly not since. And Wimberly was kind of the author of that excitement.
One of Professor Wimberly's more dedicated students was a young farmhand named Rudolph Umland. Umland loved the writing classes, as he later recalled, read here by an actor.
Wimberly made the putting of words on paper the most exciting thing a person could do. He and I both shared the same birthday, had slept in jail, and we both liked Chaucer. We both hoped to write a novel that would shock the world.
Stephen Cloyd sees Rudolph Umland as a kind of salt-of-the-earth type.
He grew up in Eagle, Nebraska, which is right outside Lincoln. Umland was kind of a short, blonde guy, well-built. You know, he'd grown up doing labor on the farm. He just had a magnetic personality. He was able to talk to anyone. He started at the University of Nebraska, but things began to go really downhill in the Depression.
As the Depression set in, hard times forced Umland to leave the university. His departure was a disappointment for Professor Wimberly.
First he went back to the farm, and then he started hopping trains.
Umland joined nearly 500,000 other young Americans who hopped freight trains during the Great Depression, looking for work anywhere. He crisscrossed the country for several years working as a farmhand, dishwasher, fruit picker, construction worker, whatever job he could land. But in 1935, after years of riding the rails in search of a job, Umland returned to his family farm just outside of Lincoln. Wimberly tried to reignite Umland's dream of becoming a writer, publishing some of his stories in the Prairie Schooner. But the Depression wore on, and the farm was doing worse.
Umland was farming with his brother, and he was getting to feel that there wasn't enough work for him, that he was a drag on the family. And so he proposed to restart his life as a hobo and catch a train and see what he could come up with along the line. And he stopped in at Wimberly's office to say goodbye to him. And Wimberly said there was this government program, this Writers Project, that was just getting started.
In the Nebraska Writers Project, Wimberly saw a chance to expand his incubator in Lincoln and thought the project would be a good fit for Umland. Besides, as the professor told Umland, it's too damn cold to ride in a freight.
And Wimberly took him over there, and they hired him on right away. So that's how he kind of got started on the Federal Writers Project.
They immediately hired me. I had never done any editorial work, but it was apparent that the director was even less qualified.
The Federal Writers Project in Nebraska was marked by troubles. For a program aimed at putting unemployed writers to work, recruiting those writers turned out to be a slow process. And the challenges started right at the top, with the state's first director, who had been hired more for her political connections than for any particular qualifications.
Just like so many of the state projects, the one in Nebraska got off to a really shaky start.
Marilyn Holt is a historian and author of the book Nebraska During the New Deal, about the Federal Writers Project in the state.
The first person who was hired as director, she was kind of a disaster. She did not know how to organize people, which was surprising because at one time she had been a school teacher. And you would think that a school teacher would know how to get people to work together.
What I remember is the director was so suspicious that other people in the project were trying to take her job away from her. And she was really attracted to flowery writing at a time when that was really passé.
A lot of that bad writing landed on Umland's desk as a staff editor. One day, the director shared an essay with a note praising its beautiful, beautiful writing. Umland found the essay, about an early pioneer, almost too terrible to read.
The traveler reported on setting out to return to his camp in a storm. Quote, "He fell into a ravine, he became lost, he saw wolves, he came upon a hidden glen where were many buffalo bones piled high, a fearful sight. He sang snatches from grand opera to pass the night. During the time he knew no hunger. He had eaten mushrooms and other wild growths. He had great strength, probably aroused by the great strain of fear and hunger. In fact, he wanted to fight a wolf, but the wolf would not come out of his den." Whew. When I finished reading, I was ready to fight several wolves myself.
It was clear the state director did not have the editorial chops for the job, and Umland, a 20-something hobo, was the most responsible adult in the room. The staffing problems and rumors swirled through the tight-knit city of Lincoln. It was particularly upsetting to Maury Sandoz, who as a leading author in town wanted to see the new agency get Nebraska history right. Yet getting rid of an underperforming manager proved even harder than hiring.
Marie Sandoz, she's like Wimberly. She's not a paid member of the project, but she's there at the beginning as a consultant. She's upset to a certain degree that the first director is not doing a very good job. And she does talk to the man who had given his political appointment and said, you really need to reboot this. This can't go on this way.
They weren't being very productive. And when they tried to get rid of her, the word came from Washington in a letter that said that as long as the Nebraska Federal Writers Project was going to exist, she was going to have her desk. So their solution to that problem was they moved her desk to her apartment.
Yes, the local staff picked up the state director's desk and literally hauled it out of the office to her home. That cleared the way for a replacement.
She kept her title, and then they just continued to pay her and appointed new people.
After a full year at work, the Nebraska Writers Project had published very little. The removal of its first state director had left a power vacuum, and the office was still disorganized. What comes across in accounts of the Writers Project beginning in Nebraska is chaos, and young people picking up the pieces. At age 28, Rudolph Umland, who had until recently planned to resume hoboing, suddenly found himself one of the most experienced people on the project staff. During his travels, he had worked all sorts of jobs, but he had never managed this type of operation. Umland sought advice from his old professor from the University of Nebraska, Lowry Wimberly.
Wimberly was not a member of the Writers Project, but very well respected. He was really supportive and very helpful to the whole process. And I think Umland, along with Wimberly, really were the driving force. They really kept it together.
Wimberly gave Umland helpful advice, and he continued to send over talented writers to work on the project. In 1936, another Wimberly protege who had editing experience became the supervisor of the project in Nebraska, and the Writers Project started to emerge from turmoil.
They got down to a core that could do the work, and I think that's what really kind of saved the thing going forward.
Here is Rudolph Umland's account, read by an actor.
The project gradually, with the transfer of a few of its lesser wits to other WPA projects, developed into something like it was designed to be. Good copy started to come into the state office. An editorial board was set up with the more capable workers and a definite flow of material, as in a newspaper office. There were several rewrite editors, a tour editor, a cities editor, and an essays editor, and a managing editor. Each editor contributed his 2 cents worth to the volume.
Another writer sent to the project by Professor Wimberly was a young poet from southeastern Nebraska named Weldon Keyes. The eccentric Keyes would bring a poet's touch to the project.
What Keyes was looking for was people who were really committed, authentic as he was. Wimberly probably saw that and thought he would be a good part of the DNA of the Writers Project.
We spoke with author James Rydell, who wrote a definitive biography on Keyes about the poet and his work.
His father owned a company, and the family had had this business for years, and it was basically one of the first industries in Beatrice, Nebraska. The parents were not well-to-do, but by small-town standards, they probably were. But when the Depression came along and the parents' fortunes declined a bit, that sense of being cheated out of something better started to well up in him, I believe, and disappointment and impatience became sort of key features in his persona. Keyes wanted to write poems with irony, with secrets, with allusions, in that kind of self-deprecating way. I was stricken. I was hypnotized by him.
Here's a recording of Keyes reading his acclaimed poem, 1926.
1926. The porch light coming on again, early November. The dead leaves raked in piles, the wicker swing creaking. Across the lots, a phonograph is playing Jada, an orange moon. I see the lives of neighbors mapped and marred like all the wars ahead, and are insane, be with his throat cut 15 years from now in Omaha. I did not know them then. My Airedale scratches at the door, and I am back from seeing Milton Sills and Doris Kenyon, 12 years old. The porch light coming on again.
Jada, 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 ding, ding, ding.
Keyes was only 23 years old when he arrived in Lincoln to study writing, but had already lived an interesting life. He traveled widely trying to find himself and his artistic voice. He even tried acting in Hollywood at one point. Professor Wimberly saw in him a diamond in the rough. Stephen Cloyd.
Wimberly had these tremendous ambitions, and he said that he brought Weldon Keyes over to the Nebraska Writers Project to kind of try and nail him down a little bit.
What was important for Wimberly was a writing community in Lincoln that was like the writing communities in any of the larger cities, because younger writers would thrive in that sort of environment. Keyes was definitely an asset because even though he probably looked down on the work that Umland was doing, they were all aspiring writers who needed a place for them to develop a certain degree of camaraderie and to share ideas, to have sort of a writing community.
Umland had now become managing editor. He still often consulted his mentors for advice, especially the wise Maury Sandoz, who had worked with editors at the highest levels. Sandoz saw the potential for Umland and the WPA writers to portray Nebraska with honesty.
Wimberly and Sandoz were always kind of behind the scenes. And of course, Umland was always talking to them. The federal writers are going over to Maury Sandoz's apartment on weekends when she was willing to have them. There were occasions in which people would talk about writing and personal things. And this is when people learned that Maury knew how to do all these Polish dances and stuff like that. So it's a functioning social circle. The writers here were a real community.
The experience was doing more than just documenting Nebraska. It was forging deep connections among people from diverse backgrounds. As Umland put it,
Lord, we had laughter in those years of economic depression. It was not uncommon to see Weldon Keyes or another staffer doubled over with guffaws.
Umland later recalled long walks through the city with Keyes, who was sometimes mooning over a girl. One night they sat for hours on a front lawn, talking.
It was a starry spring night. He talked about girls, playing in dance bands, stories he had written and books he had read. About 3 a.m., I left him there on the grass.
In Lincoln, a dynamic writing community was blossoming, a collective of creatives who found support and inspiration from one another, nurtured and guided by the vision and mentorship of Sandoz and Wimberly. Their task was ambitious: to capture the essence of Nebraska through interviews and gathered histories and weaving it into the fabric of a guidebook about the state. Using guidelines from Washington, the project writers started to interview everyday citizens about their lives. Some experts were skeptical of what these citizen writers would produce.
The people who had the academic background, either in doing oral histories or collecting folklore, they really had their doubts that these amateurs would be able to collect anything. But one of the things that drew me to this particular group were the people. Sometimes it's really apparent that a person was chosen because they had a specific skill or a specific background. I love one of the stories where the woman's father had a band, and we also called the dances. And she's talking about when they would go like to a barn raising, and the band might sit up in the hayloft to give people more room to dance.
Here's an excerpt from that interview, read by an actor.
A big dance was a way of dedicating a new barn, and they were big affairs. The hayloft would be lighted with lanterns or hanging lamps. The crowd was full of life, and they sure could dance. In one set, sometimes would be an elegantly dressed lady, bustle and all, a calico-clad country girl, even a lady from town with a wide-hooped skirt. One man might be dressed in overalls, another with a swallowtail coat. It was a sight, all in one set, circling, bowing, and promenading.
As a group, the life history interviews, as they were called, were not perfect. The staff didn't get much training. They tended to focus less on inclusive history and more on the pioneer stories of white settlers heading west to make new lives for themselves. But there were exceptions, such as a series of pamphlets about local and ethnic histories. One traced the story of African American pioneer settlements for a book called Negroes of Nebraska.
They're homesteaders. A lot of the former slaves come to the state, and one of the things that you read in the Negroes in Nebraska is the people who are writing this know that there were lots of small black towns that were organized around where black homesteaders had taken up land.
The Negroes of Nebraska pamphlet has language and attitudes that belong in the past. But that pamphlet marked a first attempt to document a story that is still little known.
Yes, people would be, I think, surprised to know that there were black homesteaders, black town builders that came to the state after the Civil War, but by the 1930s, almost all those towns are gone. Most of them have either left the state or they've gone to Lincoln and Omaha because the social and economic opportunities are greater.
Here's an excerpt from Negroes of Nebraska about one vanished town.
Negro immigrants appeared in Franklin County as early as 1867. They laid plans for a Negro colony and village. They took up homestead claims and gave the stream which flowed through their land the name of Lovely Creek, the name by which it is still called. They laid out their proposed town, the city of Grant, and plans included the construction of a courthouse.
When it comes to the West, we have all heard about black cowboys or buffalo soldiers, but the experiences of black homesteaders building their own towns in Nebraska, that is a little nugget of history that I had no idea about. But it is fascinating to learn about people who wound up making Nebraska their home.
The individual homesteader experiences could be quite different. And of course, in Nebraska, you have lots and lots of immigrant groups, Germans, Italians, Polish, Czech. So you have all these people who have different immigrant experiences, and they are living in communities that may still be largely practicing their own traditions, their own customs, their own food. Certainly, a lot of them using still their native languages. So it's a kind of continual reminder of this is who we are. We may be part of this bigger group, but this is also who we are.
No one did more interviews in Nebraska than Ruby Wilson, a nurse in the town of North Platte. After her husband lost his job, she was able to find work with the Writers Project. She set about interviewing people in North Platte, like a Mexican farm worker or the manager of a local cafe whose family came from Japan, anyone who she could persuade to sit down and talk. Here are a few quotes from those interviews, read by actors.
We came to Nebraska when I was 9 years old. If you were to see our oldest and youngest girl together, they were as different as day and night. The youngest looks like an American, her manners and all. The oldest girl likes the old country Japanese. We want our girls to live the life of this country as they are Americans.
I came in about 1917 from Old Mexico to work in a coal mine in Texas. My family, we rent homes and some buy, just like other people. For weddings, there's a big dinner and a big dance. I'm going to have a big grand wedding when I get married.
Ruby Wilson interviewed a cross-section of North Platte. She spoke with over 130 of the town's 12,000 residents in different neighborhoods. She called their stories marvelous.
I think she did it of her own accord. Some of these interviews were pretty independent in terms of deciding who they interviewed. I think they gave the writers a lot of leeway.
Umblin and his staff were doing what the national office wanted all the states to do: interview longtime residents to find the best stories of Nebraska's past for state and local guidebooks. The efforts for the local guidebooks centered on Omaha and Lincoln.
Wild towns that had to be civilized. Just lots and lots of stories about, cowboy days and the brothels and the saloons, some real rootin' good times there. That's something I think some of them really thought ought to be chronicled.
Newspaper files search for facts. I remember how shocked one worker was when she inadvertently discovered that a prominent churchwoman had once been involved in a scandal. We wanted to write a guide to the city that would be unbiased and entertaining.
But not everybody wanted an unbiased book about their hometown. Omaha's history included race riots, lynchings, and labor conflict, and that was not the tourist-friendly image that some wanted to see in print.
The Omaha Chamber of Commerce was supposed to help pay for publication because they wanted a big booster about just the good things in Omaha. Well, when they read the draft, they refused to fund it because there were lots of mentions of some of the less savory parts of what happened in early Omaha and was still happening.
But Umblin and his team were pursuing honest histories and wouldn't budge to pressure from the Chamber of Commerce. And so, no Omaha guidebook was ever published.
The project deserves some credit for not bowing to the Omaha point just in order to have another publication.
In Lincoln also, they encountered resistance from the local group that had agreed to pay for printing that city guidebook.
After several of the members had read the manuscript, objections were made to the sparing use of adjectives glorifying the city.
Instead, the State Historical Society stepped in and agreed to sponsor the Lincoln Guidebook. When the book came out, something surprising happened. People bought up copies right and left. It sold 16,000 copies in the first year, about one copy for every 4 residents. One newspaper wrote, quote, "My respect for the white-collar section of the WPA increases greatly as a result of this publication. It is a good piece of work."
The people in Lincoln seemed to kind of glory in anything that was said about it. And even when there are some disparaging remarks about Lincoln in the guidebook, they didn't try to step in and censor, sort of like, okay, this is who we are.
Although the downtown area possesses a certain metropolitan air, the city still smacks of the soil. Its people are at heart farmer folk, and the talk of crops and weather is never ending on the streets. Lincoln is unavoidably weather-minded, since all its business, even its schools, is dependent on the income of the farmers. From the Lincoln City Guide.
In the spring of 1939, the citizen writers in Nebraska were readying the state guidebook to go to press. Some were already leaving Lincoln to seek other work, but Rudolph Umblin was determined to see the book to completion. As publication loomed, Umblin reflected on the passing seasons.
I like to go into a tavern, order a beer, and watch the other beer drinkers and speculate on them. Working on writing the WPA guidebooks, I became deeply conscious of local history, the drama played by Nebraska pioneers, and the passing of the generations of the old bearded men. The tavern encompassed it all.
Others were getting restless. Umland's friend, Weldon Keyes, had less and less patience for Lincoln and their work. His attention was turning elsewhere. Tensions erupted. Keyes pushed back against Umland's editorial demands with a dismissive, "Nonsense, Rudy." Umland voiced his frustrations with Keyes in an essay years later.
Sometime during his last months in Lincoln, I suspect he became convinced he was a rare genius and fell in love with himself.
Stephen Cloyd.
There was always this friction between Umland and Keyes, and at one time Umland said, "I think Weldon Keyes is an example of a new kind of person who's only oriented towards the contemporary world and the future. There's no history for him. History means nothing to him."
Keyes soon left the project and Lincoln. While he may have denied it, his experience on the WPA left its mark on him. He gained friends who supported his poetry as good editors, and he received a boost toward his stream of publishing. Maury Sandoz advised him on how to deal with New York editors and helped him get an agent. Even Henry Alsberg, the national director, gave him a boost by selecting some of Keyes' poems for an anthology of independent writing from project employees called American Stuff. Keyes' experience on the project also affected his writing itself. James Rydell.
Keyes was in his poetry writing his own guidebook, a very personal one. Travels in North America was the capstone to his own project. It covers the ground he traveled, going across country, listening to jazz music, hitting on to Route 66. It's an incredible poem and probably is a guide, a roadmap, very much in keeping with the guidebook.
Travels in North America seems to channel the WPA guidebook spirit, infused with Keyes' own irreverence.
Here is San Luis Obispo. Here is Kansas City. And here is Rovera, Kentucky. And here, a small black dot, unpronounceable. You have forgotten singularities. You have forgotten rooms that overlooked a park in Boston, rain against a skylight. You have forgotten yellow lights in San Francisco coming on. Journeys are ways of marking out a distance, or dealing with the past, however ineffectually, or ways of searching for some new enclosure in this space between the oceans.
What I think is so cool about the Writers Project and Keyes' poetry is both are preserving some moment in time that's so unique and precious.
The WPA Guide to Nebraska was published on July 1st, 1939. It marked a milestone in the state's portrayal of itself. Like the Lincoln City Guidebook, the state guide was a local bestseller. The Nebraska Guidebook stands among the strongest entries of the American Guide series, or WPA guidebooks as we call them now. The reviews were glowing.
The fruits of relief work for the unemployed are taking form in a series of stout, handsome books of permanent and immediate value. From the St. Louis Post-Dispatch.
Alsberg had a policy of not naming individual guidebook contributors, but Rudolph Umland's humor weaves through the text, and his hobo sympathy appears in scenes rarely found in other guidebooks, like this one, describing Jefferson Square in downtown Omaha.
Jefferson Square is the only park remaining of 3 originally platted in 1854. Attempts have been made to convert it into practically anything but a park. Now it is a rendezvous for the idle men who crowd its benches. The personnel changes from day to day, but the scene, with its air of frustration and despair, remains the same.
A project editor in the Washington headquarters noted how the Nebraska office published dozens of books and pamphlets, surpassing all other states in the number of books published per capita. It can be hard to gauge the impact of an incubator, but some saw the Writers' Project in Nebraska as a culmination of a literary flowering in Lincoln. It showed what incredible outcomes can emerge when a hub for writing is cultivated, showing that talent and creativity can thrive even during the most difficult of times.
The genius of the Writers' Project is that it allowed a lot of people to meet and come together.
What the Writers' Project meant for the public lay primarily in that series of books and oral histories about their country. Still, the project left holes that remained to be filled by others in the future. The WPA writers in Nebraska lived out the legacy quietly. Ruby Wilson went on to research and write a book on local history shaped as a dialogue. Weldon Keyes continued restlessly moving across the country. Eventually, Keyes made his way to San Francisco. In 1955, Keyes left his car parked near the Golden Gate Bridge. He disappeared without a trace. For years, his friends back in Nebraska puzzled over Keyes' apparent death by suicide. Rudolph Umland never wrote a novel that shocked the world, but he did publish articles and book reviews in Kansas City newspapers while working a civil service job. His daughter Yvonne said that her father and Maury Sandoz stayed good friends for many years. Yvonne even traveled to New York City to meet the great Nebraskan author at her home in Greenwich Village. Sandoz was stylish, witty, and welcoming. Almost family. Sandoz continued to write award-winning novels and histories into the 1960s. Larry Wimberly dedicated himself to mentoring Nebraska writers and publishing Prairie Schooner until his retirement in 1956, laying the foundation for what would become one of the longest-running literary magazines in the United States. Now, after nearly a century of continuous publication, Prairie Schooner remains a testament to Wimberly's vision, offering a global stage for fiction, poetry, and essays while staying true to its Nebraska roots. For the people who lived it, the hobo, the nurse, the poet, it meant something more. Beyond the life raft of a small paycheck, they found a shared community during an incredibly dark time, and it fueled their curiosity and gave them hope for America, showing that everyone's voice could contribute to a greater collective story. The effect of working on the Writers Project was felt by tens of thousands of people, young and old, across the country. In 1939, one person expressed the meaning of that experience on national radio. In that time of deep uncertainty, a radio program called America's Town Meeting of the Air put up a question for debate. Can we count on the youth to uphold the American way? The panel they gathered included Midwestern college students and one voice from the Writers Project, 27-year-old Richard Wright. While on the project, he had won a story prize, and in 1939 was drafting a big novel about race that would come out the next year, called Native Son. That evening, to a national audience, Richard Wright expressed the fear and hope that had fueled many young WPA writers.
The Depression in 1929 caused a great doubt to enter our hearts. We were horrified at the sudden and brutal way in which all that we hold dear in human life was swept into obscurity. We created cultural divisions of the WPA, art projects to link the present with the past and to link both the past and the present with the future. These projects are trying to keep alive in the hearts of youth the dream of a free and equal mankind.
Dreams of freedom and equality. The reflective work of the WPA writers, what some have called the Great Listening Project, produced a lasting archive of collective history that still resonates and inspires us today. Historian Douglas Brinkley.
The great writer Thomas Wolfe once said, "There are a billion forms of America." Nobody before these guidebooks thought they could bring all those subcultures together. The guidebooks tried. They had a lot of misfires, but I think that it has an enduring appeal as something that makes you proud of a certain moment in American history when artists and writers worked in unison with the federal government. By celebrating Americanism in the fullest sense, it allowed different cultural strands to meet, everything being included in the mix, which is what Americanism is.
With those words, we wrap up this season of The People's Recorder. Join us next season as the divisions intensify, new stories unfold, and WPA writers go head-to-head with powerful forces in Congress. If you like what you've heard, please rate and review us, sign up for news, and share The People's Recorder with a friend. This episode was produced by Spark Media with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities and Humanities Nebraska. This is Chris Haley. Thanks for listening. If you are thinking about suicide, or if you or someone you know is in crisis, call or text 988 for confidential, free support.